Welcome to the NancoVerse podcast. How are my listeners doing? It's a cold day in New Delhi. It's February, and today I'm quite excited because I'm going for this very interesting event called the World Book Fair. It's the New Delhi World Book Fair 2024. Woohoo! This is happening at Pragati Maidan in New Delhi from today, which is the 10th of February, till the 18th of February. And I'm quite excited about this because this will have a good, nice, wide variety of books that I think I would be very interested in knowing more about. Getting to see different types of literature and different books from different times of this world. So quite excited about that actually. This is actually an event done by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting of the Government of India. So I think it's a nice initiative. World Book Fair has been happening for many years. I think some of my listeners might also have visited it in the past. So yes, I'm quite excited about that. On today's podcast, I would want to talk about the Bharat Ratna that has been bestowed upon three individuals by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This happened on Friday itself, which was yesterday, and this is the government's decision to honor PV Narasimha Rao, who was the Prime Minister of India in the 90s when India was getting liberalized. This has also been bestowed to Chaudhry Charan Singh, who is known to be a farmer leader. In fact, a Farmers' Day is celebrated at the end of December every year in his name in India. And very interestingly, MS Swaminathan, the former reformer for the Green Revolution that happened in India, to make India more self-reliant when it comes to food. And it's Mr. MS Swaminathan that I'd be paying more attention to in this episode, because I think his story is really interesting, and it was important. His contributions were very important in India at a point where India was importing a lot of food and we had food scarcity. Food scarcity is something that Indians have known about for a while now. There's been so many Bengal famines that have happened in the past when the Britishers were ruling. I think a lot of you might already know about it from history articles and stuff like that. This is where MS Swaminathan's contributions become extremely interesting, and this is something that I would want to be reading about and doing a deeper dive on. And also a little bit about what Bharat Ratna was and what was the initial idea behind it. And interestingly enough, the first person to receive the Bharat Ratna in 1954, this was a concept, Bharat Ratna as a concept was brought in by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. And the first winner of Bharat Ratna was Mr. C.V. Raman, who was a scientist. He is also known for the Raman effect, as some of you popularly might know. Interestingly, I did some research on Mr. C.V. Raman, who won the first Bharat Ratna. He was a scientist, a renowned scientist who discovered, he made a spectrometer, a spectrogram, which kind of lets you can study light beams and the effects of light on different surfaces. And he showcased that when a beam of colored light entered a liquid, a fraction of the light scattered by that liquid was of a different color, sort of creating an understanding in physics about how light and surfaces interact. Quite interesting. Like, the first was a scientist. Now we have a lot of politicians winning this Bharat Ratna award as well. Recently, Mr. L.K. Advani was also bestowed with this. And now we have PV Narasimha Rao, who was the former PM under the Congress regime in the 90s. And Chaudhry Charan Singh, who is also a farm leader and a politician. And MS Swaminathan, who is a scientist. So I would want to be getting a little bit into this. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced Friday that his government's decision to confer the Bharat Ratna on former Prime Minister Chaudhry Charan Singh, PV Narasimha Rao, and agricultural scientist MS Swaminathan, who led India's Green Revolution. This was the third announcement on Bharat Ratna within a fortnight. The two earlier decisions were on honoring Karpuri Thakur. Karpuri Thakur was known as Jan Nayak, and he was the former Chief Minister of Bihar. And his social justice legacy. He led a social justice legacy, something that I haven't done a deep dive on Karpuri Thakur. However, another politician he was also a freedom fighter. He got incarcerated during the Quit India movement in the 1940s. and L.K. Advani, who played a key role in the rise of the BJP and the Ram Temple movement. Announcing the highest civilian honor for Rao, Charan Singh and Swaminathan, Modi hailed their contributions to the country. So, very interesting. I would want to get into the life of Mr. Swaminathan here and really try and see how he was able to create the sort of he was able to lead this entire green revolution that has had such a long lasting impact on the lives of Indians. Mr. M.S. Swaminathan was called the father of the Green Revolution. He's the big daddy of the Green Revolution in a sense. There's something really interesting about people who take up something that they want to do, that they really want to do. The interesting story that he was actually, his parents were doctors and they wanted him to be a doctor as well. But something about his life trajectory where he's just like, no, I just want to create a good strain for my farmers so that they can grow more wheat and more rice. It's really interesting how people just dedicate themselves to something that they want to do and end up doing it. So, an interesting story. So, called the father of the Green Revolution, Swaminathan played a major role in the set of changes introduced in farming in the 1960s and 70s that helped India achieve food security. In an interview published by the M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation, Swaminathan spoke about how he first became inclined towards agriculture at a time when he was expected to follow his father into the medical profession. Be a doctor, be a lawyer, that's something that we all know about. It was at that time in 1942, different times, man. I can't even imagine living in India in 1942. This is pre-independence. The Indian populace is fighting against the British. There's a lot of communal violence, Bengal famine, hundreds of things are happening. It was at that time in 1942 that Gandhiji gave a call for the Quit India movement. And in 1942 to 1943, there was the Bengal famine. Many of us who were students at that time and were very idealistic asked ourselves, what can we do for independent India? This is a quote by M.S. Swaminathan, and he was asking himself at this point in time, what can I do? What can I do? We have just had a bad famine. Thousands of people have died. And here I am. This is something that I feel about, and this is what I'm going to do. Today he's won a Bharat Ratna. However, in 1942, it was a different world. It was a different country. Quote, so I decided, because of the Bengal famine, to study agriculture. I changed my field and went to the agriculture college at Coimbatore instead of going to a medical college. And I also decided to go into agricultural research, and that too in genetics and breeding, for the simple reason that a good variety has the largest impact. A large number of farmers can benefit from a good strain of a crop. This is a very simple sentence that he used, but such a driving force for what he did for himself and for the country as a pursuit. A large number of farmers can benefit from a good strain of crop. A good strain of crop is what he was trying to develop, and it's a very interesting story of how they were trying to breed Mexican and Japanese varieties together. The Indian native varieties are tall and slender. I covered this in a previous podcast as well, and this was quite interesting as to how they're modifying the genetics of the plant so that they are able to grow. If you have a plant that's tall and slender, the ears fall and the seeds fall. So you don't get the grain that you need to make rotis, basically, at this point. Or quesadillas, they would say in Mexico. So they were trying to get the dwarf Mexico varieties, breed with the Japanese varieties and bring them to India. This is in the 60s and 70s. Very interesting. In 1954, 7 years after the independence, he started working at the Central Rice Research Institute. It's really cool that there is a Central Rice Research Institute in Cuttack on transferring genes for fertilizer response from Japonica varieties to Indica varieties. So Japonica would be Japanese varieties to Indica varieties. Indica would refer to Indian varieties. He described this as, quote, the first attempt to develop high-yielding varieties which can respond to good soil fertility and good water management. After Swaminathan's work on rice, he and other scientists would work on doing the same to enhance productivity for the wheat crop. Quote, wheat was a very different story because we had to get Norrin dwarfing genes from Norman Borlaug in Mexico. So Borlaug is the guy that they were collaborating with who was in Mexico, and they were trying to get the Norrin dwarfing genes, Norin dwarfing genes, which in Mexico, he said. Borlaug was an American scientist who was working on developing more productive crop varieties. He would go on to win the Nobel Prize in 1970. Many researchers and scientists were involved in this work, but there isn't any doubt the basic strategic vision underpinning the Green Revolution in India came from Swaminathan. The problem with the traditional wheat and rice varieties was they were tall and slender. These, quote, lodged, fell flat on the ground. When they grew and their earheads were heavy, with well-filled grains produced in response to high fertilizer doses. Through Swaminathan's research on rice, a reduction in plant height was sought to make them less lodging prone. Lodging is the phenomena that they were trying to circumvent. But this was not easy. His strategy of developing semi-dwarf wheat varieties using mutagenesis. Mutagenesis is exposing plants to chemicals or radiation to introduce desirable modifications in their DNA. This did not work, however. This did not work for him. So mutagenesis did not work. The search for an ideal variety led him to contact American scientist Orville Vogel, spelled as Orvillevogel. Vogel is actually the word for bird in German, so he seems like a German dude for some reason. Orville Vogel led him to contact American scientist Orville Vogel. He played a role in developing a dwarf wheat called Gaines, Gaines, which had a high yield. It contained dwarfing genes from a dwarf wheat called Norin 10. Vogel agreed but was unsure of the wheat's potential in the Indian climate. He advised Swaminathan to approach Borlaug, again that American scientist who was in Mexico, who would later visit India. After Swaminathan proposed so to the Indian Agricultural Research Institute, allowing for wheat breeding program to begin. Quote, we started working seriously on dwarf wheat breeding program in 1963, and within 5 years, there was what was called, quote, the wheat revolution. Indira Gandhi, then PM, released a special stamp in his name as well. Dude, imagine being so gangster that the Indian government decides to launch a stamp basis what you're doing. This is pretty cool. MS Swaminathan's life has been quite interesting, and I think I would really want to do a deeper dive into this. Some of the things that I found about him were so interesting. Like, he even cleared the Indian civil services and joined the Indian police service briefly, but then he got again bitten by this bug of wanting to study genetics of plants, and he chose otherwise, and he chose genetics. Just wanting to get a little bit into his early life, Swaminathan was born in Kumbakonam, Madras Presidency, it's being referred to as present-day Tamil Nadu. He was the second son of General Surgeon M.K. Sambasivan and Parvati Thangamal Sambasivan. At the age 11, after his father's death, Swaminathan was looked after by his father's brother. Swaminathan was educated at a local high school and later at the Catholic Little Flower High School in Kumbakonam, from which he matriculated at the age of 15. From childhood, he interacted with farming and farmers. His extended family grew rice, mangoes and coconut, and later expanded into other areas such as coffee. So he'd been around farmers growing up as well. Kumbakonam is a very small village town in Tamil Nadu. Growing up in a place like that must actually be a lot different than growing up in a city. He saw the impact that fluctuations in the price of crops had on his family, including the devastation that weather and pests could cause to crops as well as incomes. His parents wanted him to study medicine. With that in mind, he started off his higher education with zoology. But when he witnessed the impacts of the Bengal famine of 1943 during the Second World War and shortages of rice throughout the subcontinent, he decided to devote his life to ensuring India had enough food. Despite his family background and belonging to an era where medicine and engineering were considered much more prestigious, he chose agriculture. He went on to finish his undergraduate degree in zoology at Maharaja's College in Trivandrum, Kerala. He then studied at University of Madras from 1940 to 1944 and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Agricultural Science. During this time, he was also taught by Kotha Ramaswamy, a professor of agronomy. In 1947, he moved to the Indian Agricultural Research Institute, IARI, in New Delhi to study genetics and plant breeding. He obtained a postgraduate degree with high distinction in cytogenetics. Cytogenetics is a branch of genetics. It's also a branch of genetics, yeah. So in 1949, his research focused on the genus Solanum with specific attention to potato. Social pressures resulted him. This is an interesting part actually. So social pressures resulted in him competing in the examinations for civil services, through which he was selected for the Indian Police Service. At the same time, an opportunity for him arose in the agriculture field, in the form of a UNESCO fellowship in genetics in the Netherlands. What did he choose? He chose genetics. This is an example of a person who cleared the civil services and was part of the Indian Police Service. I don't know how heavy it was back in the day in the 1947 to actually get a government job like that, but still deciding to choose a UNESCO fellowship in genetics in the Netherlands, which also sounds fun. However, one would think that, if you get selected to a service like that, you're just going to continue living your life the same way. You're going to take this job that you don't want to do. But he chose what he really wanted to do, and he moved to the Netherlands. He studied genetics there. Then he moved to the United Kingdom, to the University of Cambridge of Agriculture. He studied there as well for some time. He was in the United States of America, in the University of Wisconsin for some time. He was at the laboratory of the Nobel laureate Joshua Lederberg on working with some phenomenal people in his industry. And then he returned to India, back to India in 1954. And as is the case with a lot of people who return back to India, there were no jobs in his specialization. And it was only 3 months later that he received an opportunity through a former professor to work temporarily as an assistant botanist at the Central Rice Research Institute. We are back to the Central Rice Research Institute, which is in Cuttack. It's really cool that this Rice Research Institute even exists. It was started in 1966, the National Rice Research Institute. This is under the ICAR, the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. It was set up in 1946, actually, in Orissa, Cuttack. He started work there at the Central Rice Research Institute as a assistant botanist. And then his stint would go on to influence his future work with wheat. Half a year later, he joined the Indian Agricultural Research Institute in New Delhi in October 1954 as an assistant cytogeneticist, which is another part of genetic studies. Swaminathan was critical of India importing food grains when 70% of India was dependent on agriculture, which is actually quite a baffling start if you think about it. If 70% of the people are doing something, at least there should be food, but there wasn't any because we were importing grains. Further, drought and famine-like situations were developing in the country. This is the part where we discuss the collaboration between Norman Borlaug, the American scientist who helped Mr. Swaminathan breed the Mexican variety with the Japanese variety. Swaminathan and Norman Borlaug collaborated with Borlaug touring India and sending supplies for a range of Mexican dwarf varieties of wheat, which were to be bred with Japanese variety. Initial testing in an experimental plot showed good results. The crop was high yielding, good quality and disease free. There was hesitation by farmers to adopt the new variety whose high yields were unnerving. In 1964, following repeated requests by Swaminathan to demonstrate the new variety, he was given funding to plant small demonstration plots. A total of 150 demonstration plots on 1 hectare were planted. The results were promising and the anxieties of the farmers were reduced. So they worked with the farmers. It must have been a challenge for the farmer to change his varieties and choose this other varieties that this scientist dude is telling them about. It's like, hey man, I can tell you agriculture. And they're like, we're agriculturists, we're farmers. But it's like, no, I'll show you some results. I'll work with you. I can show what this different variety can do. If it's good or a bad thing is a subjective in terms of like understanding the quality of the grains that have come through. However, this was a time when there was food shortage in the country, and when you don't have food, things become very real. And this was a solution that Ms. Swaminathan was suggesting to the farmers at this point in the 1960s, mid 1960s. The results were promising and the anxieties of the farmers were reduced. More modifications were made to the grain in the laboratory to better suit Indian conditions. The new wheat varieties were sown, and in 1968, production went from 17 million tons the new varieties were sown, and in 1968 production went to 17 million tons, 5 million tons more than the last harvest. The Green Revolution has been a team effort, and much of the credit for its spectacular development must go to the Indian officials, organizations, scientists, and farmers. However, to you, Dr. Swaminathan, a great deal of the credit must go for first recognizing the potential value of the Mexican dwarfs. Had this not occurred, it is quite possible that there would not have been a green revolution in Asia. So this was the story of Mr. M. Swaminathan, and I'm quite happy that I got to research about his life and got to know more about the green revolution and more about how India became more self-sufficient when it came to food production. A lot of times when I see the wheat in the atta that I buy in packets these days, there's just so much abundance in the market. I mean, if you have the money, we're at this point where we're also distributing food to a lot of poor households through government schemes. A lot of the expenditure of the government also happens on the food distribution part. Feeding your population is something that's so important in terms of them getting anywhere. There have been researches. I was actually listening to a podcast by Dr. Huberman where they were discussing how there were prison inmates who ate breakfast versus prison inmates that did not eat breakfast, and something to do with the fact that the people who ate regular meals were able to have better outcomes within the jail. I mean, testing somebody in a jail is definitely not ideal. However, I feel like if you have food in your stomach, at least your brain functions a little bit. Fasting has its own benefits. However, if it's chosen to do, if you choose to fast, is actually a lot more better than being in a situation where you have no food. There are still places in the world, and there are still people in this world who are not able to afford for clean food, potable water, basic education, many of these important aspects that actually make somebody a person, a personality. Even Mr. M. S. Swaminathan, who has now won the Bharat Ratna, had to get education at that local school in Tamil Nadu where he grew up. If that local school didn't exist, maybe he wouldn't have been able to have the outcome he had today, even though he was the son of a doctor. I'm glad that this person, Mr. M. S. Swaminathan, even chose to do what he chose to do. He was unwavering in his focus, and it's so inspirational to actually get to know about his story. I hope I was able to bring out some interesting facts about his story, and a big congratulations to Sir and his contributions, and thank you so much for that. You're listening to the NancoVerse podcast. If you liked the video, do hit a thumbs up. And if there are topics that you would like me to talk about, do drop them in the comment sections. Do let me know what your thoughts on the podcast are, and Mr. Swaminathan as well. If there is any inspiration to be taken from the world, I think Sir definitely is one of them. There have been so many other Bharat Ratna winners, and I chose to speak about Mr. M. S. Swaminathan because of my choice to be able to do what I want on my podcast. So that's great. Love doing this, guys. I'm glad you guys listened. Whoever's listening to it at this point, just want you to know that, life is easier if you don't try and make it easier. Like, that's one of the thoughts that I've been having off late. Like, the more I try and make life easier, the more full of resistance it becomes. But if I just try and do the things that I need to do and actually put action followed by words, and even writing down things is such a big thing. That's something I've talked about in the past as well. But just simply that, hey, I'm going to do 20 push-ups today. More often than not, you end up doing 60. That's something that I've seen. But anyway, I hope you guys are doing okay. I hope you guys liked today's podcast. Do send in any feedback, and till then, scratch your head, but not in bewilderment. Go quench that curiosity.